So for us next, and to the group, next we're going to move on to regional investment highlights. Transitioning to the regional funders will provide overviews on how they align investments on the ground. So Forrest, if you want to introduce your panel.
Great. So this is our second panel of the day. Go ahead and take a seat. And if you pull off the top name tag, you'll find your names revealed underneath. Oh. So this panel couldn't have been set up any better than with Karen's descriptions of really looking at every avenue for solving the issues that we're having with wildfire, and not just looking at the usual funding sources, but really looking across a broad variety of organizations to look at how can we really leverage all these different funding sources together? How can we think differently about how we're making investments? So we're joined by 3 nonprofit organizations that we haven't had a lot of chances to hear from during task force meetings. That's the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, that's the Moore Foundation, and that's the California Fire Safe Council, who are all applying innovative, new and highly coordinated mechanisms for deploying the funding that they're managing in a very strategic fashion. We're going to have a series of 7-minute presentations. We'll have a very brief amount of time for Q&A from the executive committee afterwards, at which point we'll move to our closing comments. And so our first presenter today is Jonathan Birdsong. Jonathan is the director of the Western Regional Office for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Please welcome Jonathan. Use the right arrow key.
Thank you, Forrest, and thank you, everybody, today. Again, my name is Jonathan Birdsong. I'm the Western Regional Director for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. NFWF is the way people typically describe us. We are a congressionally chartered foundation, and we're really here, or we're really organized in which to add capacity to our federal partners. And in California, it's unambiguous, our best partner is the Forest Service. And our largest partner is the Forest Service, and a lot of the work that we do here really emanates from the headwaters down. We've been working in earnest with the Forest Service, with Sherry and her staff, really for the past 8 years, and I'm excited about this presentation and really the next chapter of our investments. So, in order for us to really evaluate how we are organizing our grant giving in California with the Forest Service and with other partners, I think it's important for us to look back at the first task force meeting that we had in Santa Rosa. And in that meeting, that really the theme is not uncommon to what we heard today, which is we need to have longer term grants. We need to break down the silos. Thank you, Angie, for the silo slide. And coordinate the implementation with environmental compliance, because oftentimes we get to the planning and the implementation, and oftentimes the environmental compliance side is really not funded, or at least thought of on the front end. And then we need to work cross boundary. It's great to see Karen here as well, and all the work that she's doing with BLM, CAL FIRE, Forest Service, et cetera, with other federal and state agencies. And the existing large pots of funding that we have with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and also the Inflation Reduction Act give us some ability to become really entrepreneurial in how we execute some of those funds. But one of the things that we don't necessarily always talk about is that the challenge within the agencies on how these funds and how these grants and agreements with each individual organization, whether it be with NFWF or the Sierra Nevada Conservancy or others, also place burden internally within the funding organizations as well, such as the Forest Service. So it's the current arrangements add capacity to, they add really pressure on the grants and agreement staff within Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, so on and so forth. And so we have different agreements for aquatic organism passage, headwater forest restorations, fuels management projects, post-fire restoration projects, so on and so forth, where each of those agreements don't necessarily add to a cohesive landscape scale type of approach to some of the challenges that we have in the headwaters. And so in order for us to really look at how do we become more malleable, how do we become more in tune with some of the needs on the forest itself, we really had to take a look back, not only to the task force meeting, but also all the other agreements that we had with the Forest Service. And so this conversation really started in earnest in 2021 with Sherry and her team to take a look at what worked, what didn't work, how do we make things better. And so incidentally, the Forest Service had their wildfire crisis strategy footprint, which incidentally also dovetailed almost perfectly. This was not by design, but with a business plan that NIFWIF puts together, which is a 10-year funding strategy where we align investments in California in particular. This works from the headwaters down. And so I think it was Mike who said earlier, we have to start really rolling up and monitoring some of the outside benefits of some of these investments as well. So this business plan that we do across the country, but in California, we also monitor California spotted owl, fish passage miles rectified, so on and so forth, stand destiny index. So these are metrics in which we establish a scorecard in which to really monitor those investments. And then finally, we had a pilot with CAL FIRE, Chief Tyler, about 3 or 4 years ago, where we decided, hey, do we really want to put together another RFP? Or do we want to try to dovetail with the RFP that CAL FIRE had? And so we issued a reciprocity agreement with CAL FIRE in order to utilize their funding, RFP as a way in which for us to then drive funding into some of the project that they might not have been able to fund entirely. So this is the meat. The meat is the fact that we were able to establish an agreement which helps break down silos both internally and externally with the Forest Service. So one, instead of doing individual grant agreements internally for fuels management, so on and so forth, this is a landscape scale type of approach in which we will be able to execute funding over the course of between 5 and 7 years to grantees. So it's a longer term investment, but also it's not prescriptive to the type of activity that's being done. Second of all, we're able to really fund some of the NEPA projects as well. So in order to help invest into the implementation planning and design projects, we also have some funding specifically allocated to NEPA as well. So then hopefully we can try to coordinate the level of planning and implementation with some contractors that can do some NEPA planning on the background as well. And then finally, working with CAL FIRE in order to really get in at the ground floor. How do these projects and this solicitation dovetail with the CAL FIRE priorities and presentation or priorities as well? How can we then not only issue that solicitation in a way that's coordinated, but also review the projects? And we talked about this as the earlier panel talked about this is the review of the projects. How can we then leverage funding that might not be applicable with the funding that NIFWIF has with the Forest Service, with also funding from CAL FIRE, so on and so forth. So I know I'm running out of time here, but hopefully we can get to this some of the question and answers later. But the process is the following. This September, we want to issue a pre-proposal. Pre-proposal strategy is really a vision statement. What do you want to do over the course of a period of time for a large scale type of grant? And then those who are invited back, those of which who are sophisticated, have the capacity and can do that type of work, then they will be required to do a full proposal. That full proposal will then require the communication with the line officers of the Forest Service, CAL FIRE, so on and so forth, the collaboratives in which we can have a full understanding of what's on the ground, what could be funded, and then issue those longer term, larger landscape scale grants. With that, I'm out of time. So I'm happy to open up to any questions.
I recommend maybe 1 to 2 follow-up questions after each presentation.
All right, thank you, Forrest. Any questions from the executive board? The committee. Great. All right.
And we'll have another chance once we've gone through all 3 presenters. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for the informative presentation. Really exciting to see both coordination among these different terms of funding sources, but then also coordinating that not just within NIFWIF and the Forest Service, but even expanding that to CAL FIRE and Forest Health. Next, I'd like to invite up so I need to make sure I have your titles correct. I'm sorry. With Kate Dargan, Senior Advisor of Wildfire Resilience for the Moore Foundation, and also Marion Whitman, who recently joined the Moore Foundation as the Wildfire Resilience Program Officer. So welcome.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, I'll sit and do the presentation. It was probably obvious why I'm asking for that. So yes, Kate Dargan. I am a Senior Advisor for the Moore Foundation. I'll give you a little bit of my credentials here in a second, but we come with a specific goal today from the Moore Foundation, and that is to leverage on Moore's credibility and their fantastic reputation as a science and conservation philanthropy and become a trusted partner to California for wildfire resiliency. So that is my goal today, hoping to engender trust and partnership specifically with the task force. So on my background, just if I can do it in 30 seconds, line firefighter with CAL FIRE for 30 years, state fire marshal for California during the time that we passed the Wildland Urban Interface Building Standards, the first digital rollout of the fire hazard severity zone mapping, founder of a technology company that is a successful fire-focused tech company, White House advisor for wildfire policy under the Biden administration, and 14 years as a board member with the California Fire Safe Council. So as you can see, it's just a broad background of policy, legislation, technology, and operations, which is probably why Moore asked if I would be an advisor for their initiative. The vision of the Wildfire Resilience Initiative for the Moore Foundation is that by 2075, we will have reached wildfire resiliency in Western North America, and beneficial fire will be the dominant source of burned acres contributing to that resiliency. We estimate that it will be a 50-year march toward that wildfire resiliency, and we are planning a 50-year effort in order to get there. We are reverse engineering from that 50-year destination vision back to today. The Moore Foundation Board has started the first round of funding for what should be a 12-year initiative. That's a little over $200 million that they're investing in these first 12 years. The first 6 years have been authorized, and that covers everywhere from Alaska, British Columbia, the Rocky Mountains, and west of the Pacific, and probably now Hawaii. Because we, like everyone else, didn't include them originally in the scope, but they are Western North America. So the foundation is making investments. We'll talk a little bit about how we're doing that. I didn't start, Marianne, so remind me. And some of the broader things that we're doing are we are building a wildfire funders network. We are investing in bringing all of the philanthropic entities in the United States that are interested in Western wildfire to a consortium, to a common set of strategies, not necessarily the same ones for every foundation, but a common strategy so that we're making investments alongside government, alongside other entrepreneurs that are aligned. We all know that government funding, one, is wonky at times. We just saw the Graphic of the Year award winner for our siloed funding sources. And we're hoping that philanthropy can help smooth out some of those gaps and help create some deep thinking, some R&D capabilities that government might not be able to do at this moment. We're working through that top level down with an MOU strategy, and that is MOUs with 4 specific states in the Western United States. That is California, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado. We chose those states for specific reasons. Those are all states that are leading in particular areas of their own expertise on wildfire resiliency, and they are bringing state dollars to the table. So we think that that makes them good partners under MOUs for that. And our pilots will not necessarily be restricted to those 4 states, but certainly some of our heavy investment pilots will be in those 4 states. Our 50-year strategy, we imagine, we'll start it off with this 12-year initiative with the Moore Foundation, with other funders that come to the table. And we're hoping that by the end of the 12 years, we have laid out a national roadmap that sections off decade by decade how this country is going to get to that goal in 2075 in a common, cohesive strategy for the country that does recognize the reality of it's a decades-long process. And how do we build a decades-worthy system around that? So our 3 core strategies, Marianne will enhance on them a little bit, are early fire interventions. That's technology, specifically to bring early detection and monitoring of wildfire, both beneficial and unwanted wildfire, to all fire actors, not just responders, but anyone who's interested in fire of any sort. The satellite system that we're researching, developing, and helping fund initial launches for will, at a 1-acre basis, be able to scoop up and provide data on every fire that exists at a 1-acre parcel for the entire United States simultaneously all at once. Doesn't matter if it's beneficial fire or unwanted fire. And the key thing about that satellite is it will give us the fire radiative power, basically how hot or how cool a fire is burning. Because it's not so much the amount of fire that we have. We actually want more acres burning than we have burning today. We just want it the right type of fire. We want it to be cool fire. We don't want hot fire, we want cool fire. And having a satellite up there that helps us distinguish exactly what temperature we're burning at and whether it meets cool or hot will help us make better management decisions. Our California pilots, we have an investment in the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative. And we have an investment we hope for up in the northern part of the state in Siskiyou County region area, both tribal and at the county level. So we are selective about pilots. This is not competitive. We actually pick areas that we think are going to be unique for specific properties. Certainly in the north part of the state, that's water. Very specifically, it's water and the water security issues we feel the state is facing. And we are very much focused on county infrastructures and HUC-8 watersheds. And with that, I'm going to close off my orientation part and introduce Marianne Whitman, our 2 weeks in program officer. As we transition, she will be the lead face of the wildfire initiative. I will be an advisor, but Marianne comes to us from UC Santa Barbara. She's a Dr. Marianne Whitman. She has tremendous credentials. We combed the country and came up with the best. So thank you, Marianne.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kate. I appreciate that really generous introduction, and thank you to the committee for having us here today. I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about myself. I'm a native Californian. I was born and raised here. I got all of my many degrees at California public institutions. So it's a point of pride for me to be able to help out my home state. A little bit about my experience. I've had a lot of experiences trained as an aquatic ecologist, and I've done a lot of work in research at the interface of management, science, and policy, including up in the Tahoe Basin on invasive species work there and other freshwater systems around. Most recently, I was at UC Santa Barbara as the executive director of its UC Natural Reserve System, where I oversaw 7 different properties encompassing 60,000 acres, and wildfire threat was important to every single one of those. And that ranged from Mammoth in the Eastern Sierra to Santa Barbara County, Oak Woodlands, even out to Santa Cruz Island too. Through that experience, we were able to establish the first prescribed burn experimental research program in the UC Natural Reserve System. And from that came partnerships with the TREX program, with county, CAL FIRE, with the local tribes, local communities, HOAs, everyone, you name it. It changed my life. And so I'm so excited and so happy to be able to bring my experience and my expertise to the Moore Foundation for this extraordinary initiative that you just heard Kate tell us about a little bit. I wanted to very quickly just go over our strategies of investment. Kate mentioned them also, early fire interventions. Again, this is to reduce threat of extreme wildfire and enable beneficial fire through improved integrated early detection, assessment, and response. Other 2 strategies, pre-fire interventions in communities, and that is to decrease community fire fire disaster risk through implemented mitigations, and then finally pre-fire interventions in ecosystems with focus on stewardship. So the Moore Foundation is in an exciting place right now with this initiative, and we have a couple products, one of which I wanted to tell you about, which is a report titled "The Economic, Fiscal, and Environmental Costs of Wildfires in California." And this report was published in June 2023, so really nearly hot off the presses. And it's a great and hopefully very useful tool for you all here and everybody in the room as well. After this meeting, I'll send a link so you can access that report and a lot of the other materials that we've put out about this wildfire resilience. And we both very much hope that we can be of service to you and to everybody in this room with what we're trying to do here. So if anyone has any questions about the Wildfire Resilience Initiative of the Moore Foundation, please contact me, Marianne Whitman, or Kate Dargan, and we're happy to talk to you. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you so much, Kate and Marianne. So we've heard from Jonathan, really focused on those headwaters down. Moore Foundation also kind of looking at from the community outward. And so apropos of that, we have JC Hyde, the Executive Director of the California Fire Safe Council, to share some updates on strategic funding around community protection.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is JC Hyde. I am the Executive Director for the California Fire Safe Council. I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. CFSC is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to support community-led wildfire resiliency efforts through coordinated capacity building, technical assistance, and grant making. As a grant clearinghouse, we have funded over $230 million in wildfire resiliency projects, and our role as the statewide Fire Safe Council is to support a network of over 300 local fire safe councils around the state. And these are community-led organizations that are trusted local partners to do the boots on the ground work in planning, education, and mitigation that are really so critical to move our communities forward in terms of wildfire resiliency. And I was invited here to talk today about how we're thinking about strategically aligning our investments through our programs and our grants clearinghouse. Right now, most of us allocate our funding based on competitive grant applications. I think we heard a lot today about why that's problematic and challenging. But the paradigm now is that most of the funding goes to the best applications, and it's really difficult as a funder to determine whether those projects align with local or regional investments that are already in place, particularly across funding organizations. And we really need to be moving away from considering individual projects in isolation towards a more strategic approach that plans and implements coordinated and complementary landscape, community, and parcel level interventions, along with the necessary educational efforts to go along with them and support them. And our communities are going to need to be able to take on multiple projects at once. So home hardening, fuel breaks, forest restoration, education, and then maintain and adapt them in the long term. And the communities that are most vulnerable are often have the least capacity. And they're also navigating many different grant programs that have from different funders with different requirements and different timelines. From a funder perspective, there isn't a consistent framework across the counties to prioritize projects. And there also isn't a consistent mechanism for the counties to receive those funds. And so it's really difficult to know if the applications we receive are in fact the highest priority projects, especially when we receive multiple applications from different organizations within the same county. And it's also really difficult to move money into the ground quickly when there isn't a consistent framework. So overall, it's really challenging for both the funders and the communities to get complementary high priority projects funded and implemented, even in cases where the local capacity does exist. It's a really complex problem. We heard some great solutions today from our previous panel. But the first step really is the local capacity building at the local level to be able to strategically plan those mitigation efforts and then move forward and implement them. So our contribution to this, among the other solutions that we heard today, is in partnership with CAL FIRE, CFSC has developed our county coordinator program, which funds a position in each county to coordinate wildfire mitigation and prevention efforts. There are now county coordinators in 52 counties, soon to be 58. And this program provides a consistent state framework to support stakeholder engagement, planning, and implementation capacity at the county level. And our goal with the county coordinators is to develop strong local networks of resiliency practitioners and stakeholders in each county to increase the communication and coordination of all the wildfire resiliency projects going on in that county from cradle to grave. And the long-term intent is for these county coordinators to be a consistent source of personnel capacity to support stakeholder coordination, prioritize, apply for, manage projects, and then leverage their relationships with local partners like local fire safe councils to be able to implement those projects on the ground. And with these coordinated networks in place, we have a relatively low cost framework that can really increase the pace and scale of mitigation efforts in alignment with the task force goals. In partnership with the Department of Conservation, CFSC also hosts regional coordinators. These coordinators support our county coordinators through mentorship, technical assistance, and programmatic support. And they also work to develop regional networks among the county coordinators so they can share best practices between counties and coordinate their efforts regionally. Through the regional and statewide coordination, we're really developing a finger on the pulse across the state in regards to readiness and local capacity and really understanding where those gaps exist. And as we've built this network, like many of our panelists, we're really recognizing a need for a paradigm shift away from random acts of mitigation, funding individual projects in isolation, toward a new model that really reduces the friction to get money on the ground rapidly. To the county level, and also providing wraparound support for the highest needs communities to be able to plan and implement coordinated projects that meet local, regional, and statewide needs. And so specifically what this will look like for CFSC is allocating more and more funding through our county coordinators as the recipient, and then they can leverage their local networks to implement those projects. And then from our end, CFSC can use our various resources to provide wraparound support to the county coordinators to fortify that framework and ensure they have the tools, resources, and funding in place to achieve those local goals. And as that capacity and those networks are built, the communities are going to be better positioned to plan and take on larger coordinated concurrent projects that are going to be necessary to move the needle on wildfire resilience. And as we build out this vision, we at CFSC are uniquely placed as a grants clearinghouse to layer our funding from federal, state, and local sources through our county coordinators to really drive a suite of coordinated and high impact projects in individual counties at the county level. And this allows for complementary concurrent interventions for for holistic community resiliency, considering landscape, community, and parcel. And as we are positioning our county coordinators, they'll be able to take advantage of funding from other funding streams like Cal OES and Cal Fire's home hardening program, from the Forest Service, from FEMA, all of these other large investments and programs that are being made. There will be someone who has the ability to apply for those projects. We've already seen some success here. Our first county coordinators started to be hired 2 years ago. They've already brought in over $50 million in grants to their communities. And we're building the infrastructure to allow us to track these efforts over time through the county coordinators and then report that up to align with the task force goals, hopefully to contribute to that dashboard eventually. And so to conclude, as we scale up and support our county coordinated framework, we can use this framework to accelerate the pace, scale, and strategies that's really necessary to live with wildfire and create healthy forests and healthy communities. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, JC. And fascinating to hear that even long-standing programs like the California Clearinghouse, supported by so many different funders, Forest Service, state and private forestry, among others, that then taking a regional approach can even strengthen those programs moving forward. And so great to hear from each of our panelists today. We'll turn it over now to a couple of questions from the executive committee. We have about 5 minutes.
All right, thank you. And thank you to the panelists for your presentations. Going to the executive committee, any questions, any thoughts? Sam?
Just a quick comment. I'm blown away by Moore Foundation's sort of vision, mission. The only question I have is, do we have 50 years? Can you?
I have a
Beat
partial
that
answer to
up.
that. Of course we do, because it will still be happening in 50 years. But one way we look at it is the best fires we're going to have are the ones that are going to happen in the next 10 years. Because the ones that happen 20 years from now and 30 years from now and 40 years from now will be worse. So the faster we get to our best solutions over the next 10 years, the better off we're going to be.
Done.
Yeah, thank you. And I like that response. I think there's a great urgency, obviously, that a lot of us sense around what we're experiencing currently with the climate crisis. I guess I really appreciate this last panel because of the focus more on the private funds. I think there's a lot of opportunity that's there in terms of the investment. Obviously, we heard earlier about the state, and federal investments and things. The one thing that I'm particularly encouraged with is the kind of the way that you can skirt around some of the regulatory review side of things with private dollars. And so I guess I'm wondering from those of you on the private sector side, how you see, that kind of opportunity moving forward.
Okay. So we had a great pilot that we worked with the Stanislaus National Forest, where we actually leveraged some Forest Service dollars with some timber industry dollars specifically to do environmental compliance on the front end. And so this was really an experiment. Can we help provide outside counsel to do, or outside contractors to do that NEPA work and work concurrent with the Stanislaus National Forest? It worked. It didn't work perfectly, but it definitely worked. And we worked on it we were able to get that contractor hired, the NEPA done, and the NEPA signed by the forest supervisor within 15 to 18 months. And then anticipating what that was going to happen, that was going to take place, we also ran a request for proposals knowing that was going to be completed. So we were then able to fund literally 2 months after that NEPA was done, the funds for implementation.
And I would add that is a conversation that's pretty robust right now, is how can philanthropic or private dollars leverage the government dollars with things that are not required of the philanthropic money to build the streamlining start of projects. And there is a lot in the philanthropic discussions, there is a lot of conversation around how can we leverage this amount of money to get through the wormholes as we find them right now. The last is we're very, very focused on building business models around everything that we grant to. So it's not just enabling, it is also building a sustained infrastructure around that enablement. So you can't just give fish, you got to teach how to fish. And part of that is really building the political infrastructure, the legislative and policy infrastructure, as well as the social infrastructure.
All right, any other comments? JC, Marion, Kate, and Jonathan, thank you for leveraging your private dollars to wildfire forest resilience across the state. It is much appreciated. It's much needed. As we talked earlier about oversubscribed grant opportunities, the funding that you bring to the table are so important to achieving our goals. So thank you for that. Forrest, I'll turn it back to you.
With that, let's thank our panel.